There are moments that seem ordinary while they are happening, and then there are moments that change the meaning of everything that came before them. Last night may have been one of those moments. Something happened in a place where people were watching, talking, laughing, and going about their lives. Nobody expected the atmosphere to change so quickly. Nobody expected one person to suddenly become honest about feelings they had kept hidden for far too long. And most importantly, nobody expected your name to become connected to the words that followed. This message is an inspirational spiritual style story, not a claim that anyone can literally know another person's private thoughts or predict what will happen. Take what speaks to your heart and leave what does not. There was a moment last night when everything seemed to slow down. The conversation had been moving normally. People were gathered together, voices overlapping, small jokes passing from one person to another, and nobody seemed to realize that something important was about to happen. Your soulmate, the person this message represents, was there carrying something they had been struggling to express. They had smiled, they had listened, they had tried to appear completely calm, but inside, something was changing. For a long time, they had convinced themselves that silence was safer. They believed that keeping their feelings hidden would protect them from embarrassment, rejection, uncertainty, and the possibility of changing everything between you. But there comes a point when silence becomes heavier than honesty. Last night, that point arrived. Someone asked a simple question. It may have sounded harmless, it may even have started as a joke, but the question touched something your soulmate had been trying desperately to avoid. Someone wanted to know who mattered most to them. At first, they laughed. They looked away, they tried to change the subject, but the people around them noticed. They noticed the hesitation, they noticed the sudden seriousness in their expression, they noticed that there was a name they were afraid to say, and then someone asked again. Who is it? The room became quieter. Your soulmate took a breath. For a second, it seemed as though they might refuse to answer. Then they finally spoke. They said your name, not casually, not as a joke, not as something they could take back 5 seconds later. They said it with the kind of seriousness that makes everyone realize a hidden truth has just been placed into the open. The people around them reacted immediately. Some were surprised. Some exchanged looks. Someone may have smiled knowingly. Another person may have asked whether they were serious. And your soulmate did something unexpected. They did not retreat. They did not laugh it off. They did not pretend they had been joking. They simply said that yes, they were serious. That was the moment everything changed. Because sometimes a confession is not about dramatic words. Sometimes the most powerful confession is simply refusing to hide anymore. Your soulmate had spent too much time thinking about what other people might say. They had worried about whether they were ready. They had wondered whether circumstances were right. They had questioned whether their feelings were real or temporary. But last night, something inside them became clear. They cared about you, and they were tired of pretending they did not. There was something else they said that surprised everyone. They said that what they felt was not about having a perfect fantasy. It was not about creating some imaginary story where everything would magically become easy. It was about recognizing how much your presence had affected them. They talked about the small things, the moments that nobody else would have considered important, a conversation, a glance, a kind word, a memory, a moment when you showed patience, a time when you made them feel understood without even realizing you were doing it. They remembered things you probably thought had been forgotten, and that is what made their confession so powerful. They were not describing an illusion, they were describing memories. They were describing the emotional impact of knowing you. They admitted that there had been moments when they wanted to reach out but stopped themselves. There had been messages they almost sent. There had been conversations they replayed in their mind. There had been nights when they wondered what might have happened if they had been more courageous. And there had been times when they convinced themselves to move forward without addressing what they truly felt. But feelings do not always disappear simply because someone refuses to acknowledge them. Sometimes they become quieter. Sometimes they become buried. Sometimes they return when a person least expects them, and last night, those feelings came to the surface. Your soulmate reportedly told the people around them that they had tried to distract themselves. They tried to stay busy. They tried to focus on other things. They tried to convince themselves that time would make everything easier. But every attempt to forget only made them understand something more clearly. You mattered, not because you were perfect. Not because the story was guaranteed to have a certain ending, not because destiny gives anyone permission to ignore reality. You mattered because your presence had left an impression that they could not simply erase. Someone then asked the question everyone was waiting for, then why didn't you tell them? Your soulmate became quiet. That question reached deeper than the others. They looked down, they hesitated, and finally, they admitted that fear had been the reason. Fear of hearing no, fear of being misunderstood, fear of making things awkward, fear of changing the relationship, fear of discovering that the feelings were not mutual, and perhaps most importantly, fear of becoming vulnerable, because vulnerability is frightening. It means allowing another person to see something you have protected. It means admitting that someone matters enough to affect your emotions. It means accepting that you cannot completely control the outcome. Your soulmate admitted that they had wanted certainty before speaking. But life rarely gives people certainty first. Sometimes courage comes before certainty. Sometimes honesty has to come before knowing how another person will respond. And that is what happened last night. They stopped waiting for a perfect moment. They simply told the truth. There was another statement that reportedly made everyone silent. They said, I don't want to keep pretending that this person means nothing to me. Those words carried weight, because perhaps the biggest part of their confession was not saying that they loved you. It was admitting that they had spent so much time hiding the importance of your presence. They had been trying to control something that had already become meaningful to them, and now the truth was visible. The room changed after that. People began asking questions. How long had they felt this way? Why had they never said anything? Did you know? Were they planning to tell you? Your soulmate did not answer every question. Some things remained private. Some emotions were too personal to explain in front of everyone. But they made one thing clear. They did not want their feelings to remain a secret forever. and that is where this message becomes bigger than a romantic confession. Because sometimes life places you in a season where you learn that you cannot build your future around other people's silence. You cannot assume that someone who cares will always know how to communicate. You cannot assume that someone who loves you will automatically have the courage to say it. And you cannot spend your entire life waiting for another person to become ready. Your worth does not depend on someone else's confession. Your value does not increase because someone chooses you. Your value was never created by another person's attention. You are valuable before anyone recognizes it. You are worthy before anyone says your name. You are deserving of honesty, respect, kindness, patience, and healthy communication. That is why this message is not telling you to chase someone. It is not telling you to force an outcome. It is not telling you to interpret every coincidence as a sign. Instead, it is reminding you that genuine connection requires honesty. If someone truly wants a place in your life, their actions should eventually become clearer. Words matter, actions matter, consistency matters, respect matters, and the healthiest form of love does not demand that you abandon your peace while waiting for another person to decide what they want. Your soulmate's confession, in this story, represents something deeper. It represents the moment when hidden feelings can no longer remain hidden. It represents the courage to speak. It represents the end of pretending. It represents a person realizing that avoiding a difficult conversation does not make difficult emotions disappear, and perhaps that is why the confession happened publicly, not because public declarations are automatically better, not because love must be displayed for everyone, but because your soulmate had spent so long keeping their emotions private that finally speaking felt like stepping out of a locked room. They wanted the truth to exist outside their own thoughts. They wanted to hear themselves say it. They wanted to stop running from the feeling. There is a lesson here for you, too. Do not be afraid of truth. Truth may not always give you the answer you hoped for, but it gives you something valuable: clarity. Clarity allows you to stop building entire stories around uncertainty. Clarity allows you to make decisions based on reality rather than imagination. Clarity allows you to recognize who is truly present and who is only present in your hopes. So if someone is meant to be part of your life, let their actions reveal that naturally. Do not force signs. Do not chase hidden meanings. Do not sacrifice your peace trying to decode every silence. Let communication become communication. Let honesty become honesty. Let action speak. And let time reveal what words alone cannot prove. Last night, your soulmate may have realized something important. Hiding feelings does not protect the heart forever. Sometimes it only delays the conversation that needs to happen. They reportedly told someone that they had imagined telling you many times. In those imagined conversations, everything was perfect. They knew exactly what to say. You understood immediately. Nobody became uncomfortable. Nobody misunderstood. Everything happened exactly as they hoped. But real life does not work that way. Real conversations are messy. People pause. People become nervous. People forget the perfect sentence. People say something awkward and then try again. That is normal. Real vulnerability rarely sounds like a movie. It sounds like a person taking a breath and saying, "There is something I need you to know." It sounds like a trembling voice, a nervous laugh, a long pause, an honest admission. It sounds human, and perhaps your soulmate finally understood that perfection was never required, only honesty was. They also admitted something else. They had wondered whether you had moved on emotionally. That uncertainty had affected them more than they wanted to admit. They had seen you continue with your life. They had watched you grow. They had noticed changes in the way you carried yourself. And instead of simply asking how you felt, they had created possibilities inside their own mind. Maybe you did not care anymore. Maybe you had forgotten. Maybe someone else had become important to you. Maybe they had waited too long. Maybe they had missed their chance. But those questions were assumptions, and assumptions can become walls. That is why honest communication matters so much. You cannot know another person's heart simply by watching them from a distance. They cannot know yours either. Sometimes two people can care deeply and still misunderstand one another because neither person is willing to speak. Last night, at least in this story, one person finally broke that pattern. They spoke, they admitted the truth, and everyone heard it. Someone asked them whether they regretted saying it. Your soulmate answered no. That answer may have surprised everyone. Because even if they were nervous about what would happen next, they did not regret being honest. That is powerful. There is freedom in telling the truth respectfully, even when the outcome is uncertain. Even when the future is unclear, even when you cannot control what happens afterward, you can still know that you were honest, and sometimes that is enough to begin healing. Sometimes it is enough to begin a new chapter. Sometimes it is enough to finally stop wondering. The spiritual lesson here is simple. Do not live entirely inside what might happen. Live in what is true today. If someone cares, let them show care. If someone wants to communicate, let them communicate. If someone wants to rebuild trust, let them demonstrate consistency. If someone says they love you, remember that healthy love is more than a sentence. It is patience, it is respect, it is accountability. It is kindness, it is listening, it is giving each person room to remain themselves. It is not control, it is not pressure, it is not fear, it is not manipulation, and it should never require you to abandon your boundaries. The confession in this message may sound dramatic, but its deepest meaning is surprisingly quiet. Someone finally stopped hiding. Someone finally accepted vulnerability. Someone finally understood that feelings deserve honesty, but honesty must also respect the freedom of the other person. That is the kind of love worth recognizing, not the love that demands, the love that communicates, not the love that pressures, the love that respects, not the love that creates confusion. The love that seeks clarity, not the love that promises perfection, the love that chooses growth. As the night continued, your soulmate reportedly remained thoughtful. They had said what they needed to say. But now came the harder part. What happens next? That question followed them after the conversation ended. They knew that saying your name publicly had changed something. Even if you had not heard the confession directly, the people who heard it now knew. The secret was no longer entirely private. and your soulmate realized that once truth is spoken, you cannot always return to pretending. That can be frightening, but it can also be liberating. They went home thinking about you. Not necessarily because some supernatural force compelled them to, but because speaking about you had brought buried emotions back into focus. They remembered your conversations. They remembered moments they had dismissed. They remembered times when they almost reached out. They wondered whether you would understand. They wondered whether you would be surprised. They wondered whether you had ever noticed the signs they thought they had been giving. And then they realized something. They had been expecting you to understand feelings they had never clearly explained. That realization humbled them. They understood that if they wanted to be understood, they had to communicate. This is where the story becomes a message for you. Never measure your worth by someone's inability to communicate. Someone's silence does not automatically mean rejection, but it also does not automatically mean hidden love. You deserve clarity. You deserve relationships where communication is possible. You deserve people who can tell you what they need without making you guess forever. You deserve connections where both people can speak honestly and listen respectfully. So keep your heart open, but keep your mind grounded. Hope is beautiful, but hope should never require you to ignore reality. Faith can give you strength, but faith does not require you to abandon discernment. Love can be powerful, but love should never erase boundaries, and destiny, if you believe in destiny, should never become an excuse to stop making wise choices. Maybe this message found you because you are entering a season where clarity matters more than fantasy. Maybe you are learning to stop chasing explanations. Maybe you are learning that you cannot force someone to recognize your value. Maybe you are learning to let people reveal themselves through consistent behavior, and perhaps the greatest surprise is that your next chapter does not depend entirely on whether one person confesses their feelings. Your next chapter belongs to you. Your growth belongs to you. Your peace belongs to you. Your future is larger than one conversation. That does not make love unimportant. It makes you important, too. There is something beautiful about realizing that you do not have to earn love by becoming someone else. You do not need to perform. You do not need to compete. You do not need to manipulate circumstances. You do not need to constantly prove your worth. The right connections should allow you to be authentic. They should make room for honest conversations. They should encourage growth rather than fear. And if someone has feelings for you, the healthiest path is not guessing, it is communication. So if this story reminds you of someone, do not immediately assume you know what they are thinking. Let reality speak. Let them speak. Let yourself speak. And allow the truth to unfold without forcing it. The confession last night may have been unexpected, but perhaps that is the point. Important moments do not always announce themselves. Sometimes they begin with a simple question. Sometimes they begin with a quiet realization. Sometimes they begin when someone finally becomes tired of hiding. And sometimes the most significant change is not the words themselves, it is the courage behind them. Your soulmate reportedly said something near the end of the conversation that stayed with everyone. They said they did not know what the future would bring, but they knew they did not want fear to make every decision for them. That sentence is worth remembering, because fear can become a powerful decision maker if you let it. Fear says, don't speak. Growth says, communicate respectfully. Fear says, you might be rejected. Wisdom says, you deserve clarity either way. Fear says, wait until everything is perfect. Courage says, be honest when the moment is appropriate. Fear says, protect yourself by hiding. Growth says, protect yourself through boundaries and truth. There is a difference between protecting your heart and imprisoning it. Protecting your heart means having boundaries. It means moving carefully. It means noticing whether someone treats you well. It means respecting yourself. But imprisoning your heart means refusing every possibility because you are afraid of being hurt. You do not have to choose either extreme. You can be hopeful and wise. You can care and still have boundaries. You can love someone and still choose yourself. You can believe in meaningful connection without pretending to know the future. That balance is powerful, and perhaps your soulmate is learning that balance now. They are learning that caring for someone does not mean possessing them. They are learning that honesty does not guarantee a particular response. They are learning that vulnerability is not weakness. They are learning that the future cannot be controlled, and maybe you are learning something similar. The deepest relationships are not built by dramatic declarations alone. They are built one honest moment at a time, one conversation, one act of respect, one apology, one moment of listening, one promise kept, one boundary honored, one difficult truth spoken kindly. That is how trust grows.